All right, we're recording. Cool. You had a great analogy with driving a car for that one. You can tell me. Okay, you can tell me the analogy. Let me get into it though. So this is our first like bit of actual educational content focused, and I want to upload these. If you're watching on YouTube, you are watching the video. For people watching the stream, we're going to be uploading these separately to our developer streams, but they're still pulled from our streams. So you guys can ask questions if you're here. If you're on YouTube and you would like to ask questions there, please feel free to put them in the comment section, and I'll try to answer you. And if you want to join us for the live streams, you can follow us on Twitch, and you can check in our Discord, and we're probably going to talk about future things people would want us to teach if we can, or future things that somebody else from like the MicroRaptor team can teach. Because I'm just a designer. I'm not like a programmer or an artist, so I can't really teach you anything too great in that regard. The first thing we're going to be going over, though, is something known as the known unknown matrix. It is a methodology of thinking about production that gets you closer to realizing what estimations are in terms of time, and of course then budget, and realizing how it works with different phases of production. So of course, when you are in the conceptual phase of a game, you really don't know what you're making, and you don't always know how to make it because you've never made this specific combination of systems or for this specific market, and there's a lot of just chaos, right? And you need to embrace the chaos when you're in that phase of development. But in order to move through each phase, you start to categorize different features and things that you'd like to do into these 4 boxes, into this matrix, this known unknown matrix. So it's very much like a multiplication table, right? You have known and unknown on both the x and the y axis, and if you multiply known and known or known and unknown, you get different combinations of these phrases. Starting in the upper left are your known knowns. These are things we are aware of and understand. And in terms of game development, you can often think of this as things we know that we have to do, and we know how to do it. You know, you can think of this like a feature of, well, we know in our game that we need a feature to open up corridors. And we've made this feature before. This is not new to us. We know how to do it. So this is something we can reasonably estimate in terms of time, right? Similar to the one that you know of, a bit different. Hopefully it works. If it doesn't work, we can change it. Known unknowns in the upper right are things that you know that you have to do. In this case, it says things we are aware of but don't understand. This is, in terms of game dev, we would think of this of things we know how to do, or that we know we have to do, but we don't know how to do. If we use this car example that we just used, maybe you need to interact with things in the driver's like, center panel. You know that you have to do it, but you've never done it before. You don't know how to do it. So this is going to require some research, and you need to make sure that when you're setting aside time to produce that feature, that you set aside enough time to research into how to do it, and you have time to prototype it. Going to the bottom left, we have what are known as unknown knowns. Very similar to the previous one, but these are things that you don't know that you have to do. But thankfully, when they do appear during development, you know how to do them. And this is just, think of something that like, oh, we also have to add this. I guess we didn't think about that, but I've done it before. I know what I'm doing. Both of these are kind of gray areas, right? If you know what you're doing, the known knowns, you know that you need it, you know what you're doing, you can very accurately estimate how much time you need for that task and who you're going to need. And then you can figure out what budget or how that's going to fit into your time frame, into your, maybe you work in, with Scrum and methodology and things like that. You have to share that with me later, Fraser, because maybe that's similar or something different. But the known unknowns and the unknown knowns are both gray areas that can lead to widening of estimation, right? Because regardless of whether or not you've done something before or you haven't, you are still estimating because there are so many things that can appear when creating a new feature or even iterating on a feature. And as you widen that estimation, it makes it much more difficult to figure out if you can schedule building something within a certain amount of time or not. The worst ones, however, are when you get into the bottom right of this matrix, the unknown unknowns. These are things that in game dev you didn't know that you needed or that you needed to accomplish, and you have no idea how to do it. These are the things that just appear randomly. You may not have been able to prepare for it, or you may have been able to, and you need to spend as much time as you can, or as little time as you can, to figure out how to get through it in a way that satisfies the producer or the publishers, the players, whatever, or even your team, or all of the above. As you work through production phases, you start to implement actual, team-based like methods and actions to reduce the amount of unknown unknowns, unknown knowns, and known unknowns, and push them into this upper left category, right? Known knowns. Of course, as you discover that you need something, it becomes known. But the really big issues are the ones where you don't know how to accomplish it, and that just requires time. So a lot of what developers will do and producers will do is set aside time for prototyping, which allows you to test out different methods of achieving an end goal, and that way they start to become known knowns over time, right? You may not have been able to know how to do it. Now you know how to do it, so it becomes a known known, and it becomes easier to estimate, okay, if we want to build this actual thing into the game, we can take this prototype and it will take us about this long, because we know the solutions that we need to accomplish that end result now. The dangerous aspect of this is producers or teams that don't understand this and can work off of absolutely nothing. Could just be even a document, but a document is not a proof of concept. It's also not a proof of fun, and it certainly doesn't prove that maybe that designer knew what they were doing with the code. They don't know the code base usually, and if they don't know the code base, they don't know how it's going to negatively impact other systems in the game, what it might require in terms of redoing the code, refactoring the code. That's the word I was looking for. So really, you need to take, the most important phase of production of game development, in my opinion, is the pre-production, because this is where you start to actually blueprint the game out. You start to figure out exactly what you need. You prototype rapidly to determine where your pain points are, right? Because pain points are more than just a UX concept. They're also a concept for developers. Where are the most difficult things that are going to take the most amount of time, and how can we reduce the amount of time needed and increase our understanding of the possible solutions to those problems? Any questions on that from chat? What percentage of bug fixing starts off in the unknown unknowns category? I would say a good portion of it. Mainly, this is a better question for programmers, but at least from my experience with bug fixing, there's a lot of things that I have a concept of what might be causing it, but I'm not always sure what is. And sometimes it can lead me down a rabbit hole of realizing that the base code that I wrote is just messed up. And now I need to refactor it in order to fix the bug. So this has just led me down into tech debt, essentially, that I didn't realize. I went to a really good talk about tech debt earlier this year, and he mentioned it as you can't prevent tech debt. You can't always predict tech debt, but everything that you add into the game incurs some debt that at some point in the future will have to be repaid. And it's always better to minimize the amount of debt by building your systems and having a code architecture and a code architect, an actual person in charge of the framework, who can sit down and just constantly take a look, review code, judge how it's going to impact things in the future, and work to minimize that by refactoring and iterating on that code. But that's probably a better question meant for an actual programmer than just somebody like me. But think of it this way: a lot of games right now are coming out very unpolished, and it's usually because games right now are so big and so difficult to plan and predict that 2 to 3 years down the line, you just don't know what your game is going to look like and what phase of development you're going to be in. And that really worries publishers, because a lot of publishers are, well, they want their business, they need to make their money back, or they have investors or shareholders that expected a certain amount of profit from this financial quarter. I mean, and this is kind of the underlying issue with games right now, right? Is they're just too big to accurately plan, because there are so many things that are either unknown knowns or unknown unknowns that you just start to incur this debt, and it spirals out of control because you can't keep up with your production deadlines. And a lot of companies don't want to invest properly into pre-production in order to minimize these problems. That's why the phase that is most important is your pre-production, and especially creating your vertical slice 2, which is the start of production. And that will be, if you're on YouTube, that's going to be in another video that's put up very similar. If you're on Twitch, we're going to get to this right after this talk. So I don't know if anybody has any other questions. This is kind of a very basic thing to understand, but it's a framework of mind that you need to put yourself into. Is what you're about to attempt, is what you're about to make something that you know how to do. And if not, understand that you're going to be putting in concepts that absolutely need to be reiterated upon, refactored, and thought about in a way that you can't always predict the schedule. Don't place a timeline on yourself until you know that a timeline is possible to predict reasonably. And I think that about covers that. So again, if you're on YouTube and you have any questions about this, or you have any concerns, disagreements, place them there. It's a great place for it. Or come into our Discord and you can open up a thread in our forums about it and give your own opinion. Or if you're a producer and you can add more to that, that'd be great, so that we understand it, so that other people understand it. And again, check out our other video on production phases that we're about to get into on Twitch over here. So see you next time.